The young doctor rolled his eyes. Security, can you remove this janitor from the restricted area? He doesn't belong here. The man in the custodial uniform didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He simply nodded once and walked away, his worn work boots silent on the polished floor. But what the arrogant resident didn't know was that the janitor he'd just humiliated was Tommy Mitchell, retired Navy SEAL, Medal of Honor recipient, and the very man who had saved half the medical staff's lives in Afghanistan 12 years ago. Tommy Mitchell had always preferred the shadows. At 58, he worked the night shift at St. Mary's General Hospital, mopping floors and emptying trash cans with the same precision he once used to clear hostile territories. His uniform was always clean, his badge properly displayed, and in his left breast pocket, he carried a worn photo of his fallen teammates and a challenge coin he'd never shown anyone. He wasn't working there because he had to. His military pension and disability benefits were enough. He worked because after losing his entire team in Kandahar, staying busy kept the nightmares at bay. The hospital's quiet corridors at 2 a.m. reminded him less of war zones than his empty apartment did. That Tuesday night started like any other. Tommy was finishing his rounds on the 4th floor when he heard shouting from the emergency ward. A multi-vehicle accident had brought in several critical patients, and the trauma team was overwhelmed. Through the chaos, he saw Dr. Sarah Chen struggling with a patient whose airway was compromised. She was a good doctor, one of the few who always acknowledged him with a genuine smile. Without thinking, Tommy stepped forward. He'd seen this exact scenario in a field hospital outside Kabul. "Doctor," he said quietly, "if you elevate the chin and adjust the tube angle by—" "Excuse me?" Dr. Marcus Webb, the chief resident, spun around with fury in his eyes. "Did a janitor just try to give medical advice?" Tommy stepped back immediately. "I'm sorry, I just thought—" "You thought what? That because you empty our trash cans, you understand medicine?" Webb's voice carried across the trauma bay, causing heads to turn. "Security, can you remove this janitor from the restricted area? He doesn't belong here." Dr. Chen looked up from her patient, confusion and embarrassment crossing her face. She wanted to say something, but the hierarchy was clear. Residents didn't contradict chief residents, especially not for custodial staff. Tommy didn't argue. He'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. He simply nodded once, adjusted his custodial cart, and walked away, his worn work boots silent on the polished floor. Behind him, he heard Dr. Webb muttering to the other residents about overstepping boundaries and knowing your place. But someone else had been watching. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, a Navy nurse on temporary assignment, had been observing from the medication station. She'd seen something in the janitor's eyes, something familiar. The way he'd assessed the situation, the specific terminology he'd used, the quiet confidence in his posture, it reminded her of someone. She followed Tommy into the hallway. "Excuse me," she called softly. Tommy turned, expecting another reprimand. "Yes, ma'am? That suggestion you made in there about the airway management. Where did you learn that?" Tommy hesitated. "Just something I picked up over the years." Rodriguez studied his face carefully. "What's your name?" "Tommy Mitchell." Her breath caught. She'd heard that name before, in briefings, in stories passed down through the naval medical community. "Thomas Mitchell? Navy SEAL?" Tommy's expression didn't change, but his shoulders straightened slightly. That was a long time ago. "Captain Rodriguez, Naval Medical Corps. I need to make a phone call." Tommy shook his head. "That's not necessary, Captain. I'm just here to do my job." But Rodriguez was already walking away, her mind racing. She'd heard the stories about Tommy Mitchell, the SEAL who'd held a makeshift medical station for 18 hours while under enemy fire, saving 13 wounded soldiers and 4 medical personnel. The same man who'd received the Medal of Honor and then disappeared from public view after losing his entire team 6 months later. 20 minutes later, Rodriguez's phone rang. The voice on the other end was crisp and authoritative. "Captain, this is Commander Jake Sullivan, SEAL Team 6. Did you say Thomas Mitchell?" "Yes, sir. He's working here as a janitor. One of the residents just humiliated him in front of the entire trauma team." There was silence on the line. Then, "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Back in the trauma bay, Dr. Webb was holding court, regaling the younger residents with his thoughts on maintaining professional boundaries. "The last thing we need," he said, adjusting his stethoscope dramatically, "is custodial staff thinking they can practice medicine. Next thing you know, they'll be wanting to perform surgery." The other residents laughed nervously. Dr. Chen remained focused on her patient, but something bothered her about the entire interaction. The janitor's suggestion had actually been sound. More than sound, it had been precisely what she'd been struggling to implement. At 3:47 a.m., the hospital's main entrance doors opened with unusual force. Commander Jake Sullivan entered in full dress uniform, his seal trident gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Behind him walked two other men in uniform, a hospital administrator who'd been hastily called in, and Captain Rodriguez. The night security guard immediately stood at attention, recognizing the authority that had just walked through his doors. "Sir, is there an emergency?" "I need to speak with your trauma team," Sullivan said, his voice carrying the kind of command that made people move without question. "Now." In the trauma bay, the controlled chaos of the night shift continued. Dr. Webb was reviewing charts when he noticed the unusual quiet that had settled over the normally bustling emergency department. Conversations had stopped. People were standing straighter. When he looked up, he saw them. 3 military personnel walking purposefully toward the trauma bay, led by a man whose presence seemed to command the entire space. The seal trident on his chest caught the light like a beacon. Commander Sullivan's eyes swept the room until they found Dr. Webb. "Are you the physician who ordered custodial staff removed from this area tonight?" Webb blinked, suddenly feeling very small. Yes, sir. We have protocols about non-medical personnel in restricted areas." "I see." Sullivan's voice was calm, controlled. "And you felt it appropriate to humiliate a member of this hospital's staff in front of your team?" "Sir, I was just maintaining professional boundaries. The janitor was overstepping." "The janitor," Sullivan interrupted, his voice dropping to a tone that made every person in the room pay attention, "is Petty Officer First Class Thomas Mitchell, United States Navy SEALs, Medal of Honor recipient. The man you just called just a janitor saved the lives of 17 people in Afghanistan, including 4 Navy medical personnel who went on to train half the trauma doctors on the West Coast." The silence in the trauma bay was absolute. Dr. Chen's hands stopped moving over her patient's chart. The nurses froze. Dr. Webb's face went pale. Sullivan continued, his words measured and precise. "Petty Officer Mitchell has more combat medical experience than everyone in this room combined. He's performed emergency surgery under fire, managed mass casualty events in conditions you can't imagine, and maintained operational medical standards that kept entire units alive for months at a time." He stepped closer to Dr. Webb. "So when a man like that offers a medical suggestion, the appropriate response isn't humiliation, it's gratitude." Webb stammered. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know," Sullivan said. "Because men like Tommy Mitchell don't announce their service. They don't demand recognition. They simply continue to serve in whatever capacity they can because that's who they are." At that moment, Tommy appeared in the doorway, having been called by the administrator. He still wore his custodial uniform, but something had changed in his bearing. He stood taller, his shoulders squared, his eyes clear. Sullivan turned and came to attention, offering a crisp salute. "Petty Officer Mitchell." Tommy returned the salute with practiced precision. "Commander, I understand there was some confusion about your qualifications tonight." Tommy glanced around the room at the faces staring at him, some with newfound respect, others with embarrassment, all with recognition of something they'd missed. "No confusion, sir. I'm exactly where I choose to be." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her voice quiet but clear. "Mr. Mitchell, Tommy, your suggestion earlier about the airway management, it worked perfectly. I should have listened." Tommy nodded. "You did fine, Doctor. You always do." Commander Sullivan opened a briefcase he'd brought with him. Inside was a thick folder marked with official seals and a small velvet box. "The hospital administration and I have discussed your situation. They'd like to offer you a position as a civilian medical advisor, working with the trauma team. Your experience with battlefield medicine could save lives." Tommy looked at the folder, then at the faces around him. For 12 years, he'd been hiding in plain sight, just another invisible worker in scrubs and work boots. Now suddenly he was visible again. "I appreciate the offer, Commander, But I like the night shift. It's quiet, peaceful. He paused, looking directly at Dr. Webb, though I wouldn't mind being consulted when experience might help save a life. Dr. Webb stepped forward, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine remorse. Mr. Mitchell, Tommy, I owe you an apology, a significant one. Tommy studied the young resident's face. He saw genuine regret there, the kind that came from realizing you'd misjudged someone completely. Dr. Webb, we all make assumptions. The important thing is learning from them. Sullivan placed the velvet box on the nearby medical cart. This is from your former team members' families. They wanted you to have it. Inside was a new challenge coin, engraved with the names of Tommy's fallen teammates, and a simple inscription, their sacrifice, your service, our gratitude. Tommy stared at it for a long moment, his composure finally cracking slightly. I couldn't save them. But you saved others, Sullivan said quietly. And you're still saving others. That's what they would have wanted. Dr. Chen approached with her patient's chart. Tommy, if you don't mind, could you look at this? I have a feeling your experience might help. Tommy glanced at Sullivan, who nodded. Then he took the chart and began reviewing it with the same attention to detail he'd once used to plan extraction routes and set up field hospitals. As he worked with the medical team, something shifted in the trauma bay. The other staff members began to see him differently, not as the invisible janitor who emptied their trash, but as a highly trained professional who'd chosen to continue serving in a different capacity. Dr. Webb watched from the side, learning more about humility in 1 hour than he'd learned in 4 years of medical school. Over the following weeks, Tommy continued his custodial duties, but his role expanded. When complex trauma cases arrived, he'd quietly appear, offering insights that came from years of treating battlefield injuries under impossible conditions. He never sought credit, never demanded recognition. He simply helped when help was needed. The hospital staff began to understand that heroes don't always wear capes or carry weapons. Sometimes they wear custodial uniforms and carry mops. Sometimes they save lives, not with grand gestures, but with quiet competence and hard-earned wisdom. Dr. Webb requested a transfer to a different department, not out of shame, but to work directly with veteran patients, hoping to learn about service and sacrifice from those who'd lived it. His approach to both medicine and life changed fundamentally after that night. 3 months later, the hospital dedicated its new trauma wing. The plaque by the entrance read, "The Thomas Mitchell Emergency Medical Center, where every life matters, every voice counts." Tommy attended the dedication ceremony, wearing his dress blues for the first time in 12 years. When they called his name, he walked to the podium with the same quiet dignity he'd shown that night in the trauma bay. His speech was brief. Service isn't about recognition. It's about being where you're needed, when you're needed, in whatever capacity allows you to help. Thank you for letting me continue to serve. Commander Sullivan, now a regular visitor to the hospital's veteran programs, watched from the audience with pride. The SEAL community had never forgotten Tommy Mitchell. They'd simply been waiting for him to remember himself. That evening, as Tommy made his rounds through the hospital's quiet corridors, he carried himself differently. The same careful precision, the same dedication to duty, but with his shoulders squared and his head high. In his pocket, alongside the worn photo of his fallen teammates, he now carried the challenge coin from their families. It reminded him daily that service takes many forms, and heroism isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it's as simple as showing up, doing your job with excellence, and being ready to help when the moment demands it. The trauma bay runs smoothly now, with Tommy's quiet guidance helping to save countless lives. Dr. Chen has become one of the hospital's most respected emergency physicians, crediting Tommy's mentorship with much of her success. And late at night, when the hospital is quiet and the corridors are empty, except for the soft sound of Tommy's work boots on polished floors, the staff knows they're in the presence of a different kind of guardian. One who proves every day that true heroism isn't about the uniform you wear or the recognition you receive. It's about the lives you touch, the people you help, and the quiet dignity with which you serve others, even when no one is watching. Tommy Mitchell, Medal of Honor recipient, retired Navy SEAL, and night shift custodian at St. Mary's General Hospital, a hero who never stopped serving, even when the world forgot to notice. Because some battles are fought not with weapons, but with mops and buckets, and the unshakable commitment to be helpful wherever help is needed. And sometimes that's the most heroic service of all.